It's been another momentous week, and this week we're going to be talking about the lost boys of DOGE, the scandal and controversy about USAID creating the left-wing NGO apparatus, and finally, our Hegelian theory of Trump as world spirit that has extended itself across the Middle East. All that and more in this week's episode. So I guess we can start by just how has your week been? Yeah.
The week's been good. I'm still recovering from my illness that I got in DC when I got hit with the Havana gun. It was so I don't know what's going on. I'm like it was tested as influenza B, but it has very COVID-like characteristics and that kind of brain fog and this lingering cough. And I have been reading reports about is there like a new COVID going around or something else, maybe a bird flu of some kind. So I don't know. I've totally lost my trust in the public health bureaucracy to sort of figure this stuff out on our behalf. So we'll see. I'm fine. I'll recover. The methylene blue is working. So I'm good. Although my pee is blue. That's one of the side effects of taking methylene blue. I'll just say.
Yeah,
that.
I've heard that. I think that RFK Jr. is a user of the blue.
That's right.
It's amazing. Yeah, this week has been crazy. I was actually in DC and New York this week, and going to raise some money, and then to talk to some folks, and then to do a victory lap in DC at the White House. And the energy is off the charts. I mean, people are disciplined, focused, excited, working insane hours. And, it's like however much like I might work in a week, they're working harder. It's kind of an amazing thing. Yeah.
Well, so I'm curious though, are you seeing the other side of it? So there's obviously all this energy on the right. Trump's people are in. I'm assuming a lot of them are sort of younger. This isn't the same old like GOP roster that we were used to over the last decade. This is new blood. These are the whiz kids of the right. And then I'm wondering, though, like, is the left anywhere to be seen? Or, like, these bureaucrats who used to sort of occupy these offices, the NPCs who used to just, like, walk around and do nothing all day, where are they and what are they doing?
Great question. So I went to the Department of Education building yesterday in the afternoon after the White House visit. And it's this massive, stained, brutalist building taking up a whole block in D.C., and it's virtually empty. Some of the security guards were telling me, I said, hey, where's the cafe or cafeteria or whatever? I came a little bit early. They said, we have too few people in the building. We can't even find a vendor to occupy the cafe and the cafeteria. Like, they can't sell enough coffee and sandwiches to even justify the business contract. Because nobody shows up for work. They have, the kind of politicals that came in said, when we first started coming in January 20th, there were maybe like 10 people in this office, which takes up an entire city block out of 1,800. But so you have what happens is you have on the executive floor, you have, a couple dozen political appointees and staffers that have come in. They're just absolutely crushing it, slamming through it, getting everything together. And everything else is empty because they've been on permanent work from home since 2020. But what's interesting, and this is where the tension comes in, is that on February 23rd, they're required by executive order to show up for work full time.
Yeah.
And so the political staff, I was joking with them, I said, that's going to be awkward. Like, you've now just recalled 1,800 people from kind of 4 or 5 years of permanent vacation, and you're at extreme political odds. And they're laughing. They're like, yeah, it's going to be pretty weird when these worlds collide. But for right now, it's like they're like suspended in a cinematic tension. It's very cool. Yeah.
It's so interesting. I mean, it's like what you're describing is like a conquering army has like come through and may, have expected to, have some resistance, but the defending army is like gone. They're in retreat, and now they're just like, conquering the citadel, and there's nobody there. I mean, I wonder, like, if these people come back, what do you do with them? Presumably that means they want to work, and they're willing to work within the constraints of, Linda McMahon and whoever else is running the Department of Education. But, you don't want to make them go through some kind of like loyalty test, okay? We don't want to do that. But at the same time, how do you vet these people to ensure that they're going to be on task and do the bidding of the Trump administration? Or is there a way to do that?
I mean, in a limited sense, yes, they'll have to do the bare minimum responsibilities of the job. And look, some jobs, like people that are doing facilities, it's not really ideological. There's actually a lot of jobs that aren't ideological. The team that's managing the student loan portfolio, they're like accountants and finance professionals. They could probably be pretty reasonable and get along. But the actual pedagogical and kind of programmatic stuff is a massive conflict. I mean, you have people that are completely on the opposite sides, and that is going to be a fight. But look, they've already taken all the DEI employees, put them on leave, and they will eventually be fired. And so there are consequences. And I mean, this happens, this happens. Look, it happened at Twitter when Elon took over Twitter. I mean, and so I think that this is like a classic management test. New management comes in, the employees are scared and hostile. What do you do? And there's the other rumor, and I will not reveal any, proprietary information that in theory one could have gleaned. But there's a well-published in reporting saying that the president is going to attempt to abolish the Department of Education by executive order. So you have this like sort of Damocles hanging over everyone's head. So to me, it's like cool. What's interesting about it is the narrative that is coming. Like you said, it's like this medieval conquest situation, and they're all coming in.
This is interesting because if it's true, and we're not saying it is or is not true, that Trump might intend to actually abolish the Department of Education by executive order. Maybe even like as recently as 6 months ago, honestly, I might have said, great, let's do it. Let's just cut this thing out. I'm starting to come around to the idea that actually maybe we want to preserve the power of these various institutions, including USAID, by the way, which we can get to in a minute. But that we don't actually just want to cut the legs out from underneath them, raise them to the ground, ash and salt the ground, and then move on and just not have anything in their place. What we actually want to do is just take these things over. And if we can somehow, like if there is a segment of the Department of Education that is ideologically driven, this would be the people in charge of creating curriculum, the sort of pedagogy for K through 12, presumably across the country. They're probably not aligned with us, 95% of them, let's say. Can we, get rid of them? Can we just get rid of them? Can they be all fired? And if so, do we have a roster of people that we can put in their place? Because actually, as it turns out, K through 12 schools do need curriculum. We're not just going to get rid of our education system overnight by executive order. It exists. It has an important function that can't just be removed in one fell swoop from American life. So what should we do about that? What we should do about that is take control of it and put our people in. I don't know how you feel about this. Maybe you feel otherwise, that we should just get rid of this thing.
Yeah, it's a great question. I seesaw on this question because for pragmatic reasons, can you actually wind down the Department of Education? One argument is that, no, the president can't do it unilaterally. Yeah. He needs Congress to do it, and Congress has promised to do it, but failed to enact legislation to do it for 40, 50 years, since 79. And so if that is the case, if you're assuming that it can't be done, then the only right course of action is to capture it. Capture it, to gut it, and to fill it with good people who are going to say, we're not funding critical race theory and kind of trans stuff. We're going to fund classical education. We're going to subsidize homeschool and charter nonprofits. We're going to we're going to host a logos, truth, goodness, and beauty seminar in the Department of Education, and bring in all the great, Christian leaders and classical education leaders, and make the department ours.
Yeah.
I think the question is pragmatic. Which is more feasible? And then do we have the talent and do we have the administrative capacity to actually capture and replace? That's what we did at New College down in Florida. Or do we not have that? And the best thing is to get the institution and the money off the table, because our assumption is that it will be left wing now, or it will certainly be left wing eventually. And just actually getting it off the table completely is a way to permanently reduce the power of our ideological enemies. And that is a more feasible and prudent path than trying to use it to bolster our own resources. So the question is, I don't know. I mean, look, that's like what's so cool about what Elon is doing. And we should talk about DOGE. Traditional management in Republican administrations has been pathetic. You become the secretary of something, you go to the cocktail hours, you go to the mixers and receptions, and the institution below that very upper level functions as a left-wing institution.
Yeah.
No one wants that anymore. The public is too smart for this. And so you've been following DOGE. Like, what is your take on DOGE? What was your take on DOGE before the administration? And is it the same, or did it change now that they're getting to work?
So before the administration, I actually didn't know. I was not terribly optimistic that they would be able to go in and just start sort of surgically removing waste from across the federal budget. I thought those forces were kind of too entrenched. Those interests were too entrenched and frankly bipartisan, that it was going to be very difficult to even get like Republican congressmen on board. Because they were also benefiting from this massive sort of patronage network, frankly. And I have been pleasantly surprised, actually. This is like my own mistake. Like, how dare you bet against Elon Musk, okay? Like, what world have you been living in for the last 2 decades to think that Elon Musk isn't going to be able to do precisely the thing he intends to do? So I probably should have known better. But even then, and as optimistic as I was about the Trump administration generally, I have been really surprised just how quickly and surgically they've been able to go in and start removing and exposing so much of this waste. And I have to say, okay, Data Republican, she's this great account on Twitter, an incredible quant, who did incredible data analysis during the election. Like, and if you would have been following Data Republican, you would have known the outcome of the election far before, anybody on cable news. She put together this tool, which has its own, issues that we can get into.
It does.
But it's this incredible tool where anybody can go on and search through these federal expenditures, through the grant programs, and see where this money is going. And it really is an eye-opener, okay, just how much waste there is out there. And I think the real eye-opener to me, too, is not just that it seems to be, the ideological valence seems to be almost exclusively to the left, and therefore very easy to convince congressional Republicans to do something about it, but also just how vast this expenditure is, and just how much low-hanging fruit there is to pick for people in DOGE, who have proven themselves to be incredibly competent. So I'm very optimistic about how this will proceed.
Yeah, same. And, it's interesting because in a way it's actually not waste, it's patronage.
Yeah.
Of course, in a sense of society, it's waste. It's like I know that you and I were probably both doing this. You just take some salacious keyword and drop it in. Like I did pansexual last night. I was on the airplane coming back from DC, and I just took the Data Republican tool, typed in pansexual, and all these grants come up about pansexuals. There was one, and this one was amazing. It was a grant to a nonprofit to teach transgender, bisexual, pansexual, and non-binary people how to farm. They're setting up some sort of LGBTQ plus plantation in New York, and the government is putting hundreds of thousands of dollars towards this effort. And so this is patronage. It doesn't create any societal benefit. It's not in the common interest. It doesn't advance the capacities of the United States. But it's people within the administration rewarding their ideological allies, and then they're letting these people, you click through, who is this group? It's a left-wing gender activist organization.
Yeah.
And so that's how you get, like, Republicans always ask, how are all these crazy people protesting at 10:30 a.m. on a Tuesday? This is how.
Yeah.
Because Uncle Sam is paying their bills through these NGOs. But what I was interested in DOGE, and I talked to a number of people in the administration. I keep my tabs on various cabinet teams, and they're all like whispering to each other. Like, did you see the DOGE guys? The DOGE guys came yesterday. Yeah, I think one of the DOGE guys was sleeping in the office over there. It was amazing. Like, they're in awe of these kids, these nerds.
That's right.
These like 19, 20-year-old nerds. And I asked one of the cabinet teams, I was talking to on the phone, because I was helping some folks around the administration navigate getting rid of DEI. And they said, yeah. I was like, what are they actually doing? And like, they go to the IT room, they get into the computers, and they're looking at two things. They're looking at HR and payments, contracts. And so they've kind of hacked into, they have the keys to the castle. And the thing that they're doing through IT is figuring out who are the people and where does the money go.
Yeah.
And that, to me, it was a revelation to me, because it's saying Elon is so smart, so focused. He's having 3 or 4 guys that can then go in and shred these massive 5,000, 10,000, 100,000 person bureaucracies.
Yeah, okay, so this thing you're pointing at where it's personnel and payments. It seems obvious once you say it out loud, but the thing about, and this is the thing about Elon and these kids too, obviously, is the ability, and like probably most politicians don't think this way, but they're engineers and they're thinking about what is the load-bearing hinge point in these massive mechanisms. And these things, when you and I look at this, we just see this big morass, and the question is, where do you start? You kind of get overwhelmed. And you're paralyzed because you just don't even know where to begin unwinding this mess. Whereas these guys just, and again, it's so obvious in hindsight, but they see, okay, no, actually, there are like these 2 critical load-bearing points. And if we just attack these load-bearing points, the whole thing falls out from underneath. And so it's been really remarkable to see that with a relatively small team. What's interesting about this too is, I'm not like technically savvy enough to confirm this on my own, but the people I talk to are like, this is only possible because of technological advancements over the last year, like 6 months. You could not have done this in 2022 because these AI tools didn't exist. You wouldn't have been able to search through these huge databases. So there's this incredible confluence of like 10 different things happening here. Elon, these tech kids, which is interesting to me because the tech, the youth, the smart, high IQ, competent young people in America are supposed to be on the left. Yeah. This was like the Obama coalition, okay? Obama is supposed to have all these whiz kids, but as it turns out, they can't even build a functional healthcare website. And, this was the big disaster of like the Obamacare rollout. Despite all the tech people they had, they couldn't do something very basic. Elon comes in and there's this new crop of tech talent. And I don't know how ideological they are, and I don't really care. It's enough to know that they just want to work in the federal government under Donald Trump. That's all the signal I need, okay? Yeah, exactly. And they're incredibly efficient, incredibly competent, in a way that Obama coalition could never be. So even if the aggregate number is smaller for our side, although I think it's growing, it's catching up to like young, smart, highly educated people on the left, they're better. The quality is much higher. And so you can do more with less. And I think part of the anger that we're seeing from the left, you just like Wired, for example, is, this tech magazine that seems to have like decided these kids are like the worst people in the country and need to be brought to heel. It's because they feel entitled to this talent. I yes. really do think they feel like these guys are supposed to be our guys, and they've switched sides, and now they're treating them, as political enemies. So there's a lot of like interesting dynamics here.
Yeah, and actually, the irony that you're teasing out, this transformation from an Obama vehicle. Obama was the like online, small donor, hyper technological president. The irony in the executive order that Trump wrote to establish DOGE, it's not actually a new entity. They just renamed an existing entity, which was the U.S. Digital Service, which was established by Barack Obama. And so it's just amazing. Elon literally took over the Obama Digital Service, which failed on the website, changed the name to DOGE, like a kind of mimetic value of this DOGE term, and then brought in these young Gen Z kids to use the Obama tool against the Obama bureaucracy.
Yeah.
And so it's like it's like there's like a justice to it. There's a symbolic resonance to it. And I think the talent question is exactly right. They're scared because DEI commits them to low talent by definition.
Yeah.
Merit is no longer the judge. Identity is the judge. Merit is subordinated. What Elon is saying is, I just want the smartest, fastest, most capable people. And his companies essentially look mostly like white, East Asian and South Asian men. That's basically the engineering base. And then he goes in and gets the job done. He lands rockets picks them up with chopsticks. It's like, this guy can do this guy can do the technological job. The question, and I think this is still outstanding, can he do the political job? His approval rating is underwater now. The protests that are mobilizing around the country are not against Trump. They're now against Elon, which I'm sure makes the president jealous. So can Elon survive politically? And it's complicated by the fact that Elon is seemingly immune to social graces. He's like that. He's got that kind of personality. And so to see someone with that characterological and personality succeed at the highest level in politics, to me would be incredible. And I think it would be a very cool cultural transition, because he's like the opposite of Gavin Newsom, right? Gavin Newsom, hyper charismatic, but hyper incompetent.
I mean, the thing with Elon is, though, for him, what would it mean to sort of succeed politically in this case? If the broad perception of him, from the American public, if you just do some like polling on this, is like slightly underwater, well, so what? It's almost immaterial, because his function within the government actually isn't to be popular or generate, or let me say this, he doesn't have to be broadly popular. He just needs to maintain popularity within the Trump base. And so that the Trump voters don't feel alienated by or fractured by the presence of Elon Musk. And I think the initial tack that the left had was to try to use Elon Musk as a wedge to break apart the Trump coalition. And what we're seeing now instead is that the presence of Elon Musk has actually galvanized that coalition, and everybody said, no, this is our guy, this is our Redditor, okay? This is the guy we're going to rally around. And now their new tact is to like make the general public sort of have a lesser impression of Elon Musk. But I mean, how much does that matter? Maybe he sells a few less Teslas or something, but I don't think it actually matters that much, frankly. The other thing I just want to point out too about the Doge kids, because it's so interesting to me, this question of meritocracy and what that looks like. Okay, this is what it looks like, but it's also, and I don't want to make too big a point out of this because of small sample size and everything else, but the kid Luke Ferrator, who has kind of become the symbol of this group, and he's the one who used these AI tools to decode this scroll from Pompeii, the carbonized scroll, just like incredible talent, incredibly smart, but he kind of circumvents like the traditional like credentialing mechanisms that we're used to seeing determine who is and isn't meritorious. So did the kid go to Harvard or MIT? No, he went to the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I'm not even sure he graduated. I actually don't think he even graduated from there. His merit is determined by the things he actually did, okay? He has demonstrated competence. And I want to juxtapose that with a video I saw that was kind of making the rounds on Twitter today. It's this woman on CNN in conversation with Scott Jennings and like someone else on this big panel. She's a anchor from ESPN, and she's a black woman, and she says, she like shuts down the rest of the conversation. She says, DEI is for me. Like, I need it because even though I have a degree, I have 2 degrees, I have a law degree, I have 2 bachelors and this degree, and I have more degrees than anybody else on this panel and probably the entire panel combined. I've never made more money, or I've always been the lowest paid person on payroll at every organization I've been at. And then to the question of, okay, well, what's your accomplishments? Like what have you actually done? What's your competency? What would be the reason that you should be paid more? It is strictly this litany of credentials that this person has accumulated. And so part of like meritocracy is also reshuffling what constitutes merit. It's not just this litany of credentials, which are, and those organizations that own the credentialing monopolies are almost exclusively on the left. It's now reprioritizing what people can actually do, their accomplishments. So I think there's like a very symbolic sort of element to Luke Ferrator in particular.
Love that guy. Love Luke Ferrator.
Yeah.
He must be protected at all costs.
At all costs. Yeah.
And I'll tell you, the left hates this guy. There's a video of this kid. And then there's a piece that Barry Weiss published in the Free Press about him, all before the DOGE thing, about his winning this prize for the scroll. But so, and the kid is like the nicest, most polite, calm, humble, great kid you really like. You can't help but like and want to succeed, and you're happy for his success. But since he became the poster boy for DOGE, he's been getting threats. He's had to deal with his parents getting doxxed and threatened. I mean, the left hates competence and excellence, especially if it's a mild-mannered, young, white man from Nebraska, that they're literally, harassing his parents and trying to chase his parents out of their home. And so it is something that we have to rally to his defense. And what's been cool too is, and I think this is the reshaping of meritocracy. A16Z, the venture capital firm, hires Daniel Penny.
Yes.
And then Jason Calacanis, again, hit or miss on Jason Calacanis. Personally, I have varied opinions. But Calacanis said any of the DOGE kids that after their service, I'll give them $250,000 apiece to start a company. And so there's this reshuffling of money, status, and incentives that I think is the start of something incredible.
We talked about what's like USAID. What are all these grants doing? Okay, it's a vast patronage network, and if you're just like looking at this objectively, remove the
So give us the 5,000 foot view, the USAID story. This is a big story. It's kind of gone off the rails, but give us the basics.
All right. So USAID is part of this like broad morass of government spending that appears from what we've seen over the last few days, and Mike Benz, great analyst, and he was in, I can't remember the exact program he served in, but he's been on Joe Rogan. He's been talking about USAID and the abuses of USAID and the waste and fraud, and how it's basically a front organization for our foreign policy establishment. And what USAID does is it sends money across the world to ostensibly serve the interests of humanitarian efforts around the world. It provides medicines. It's one of its biggest expenditures is fighting HIV in Africa. It does basically nation building programs. This one organization that's one of the biggest contractors for USAID, Chemonics, they build infrastructure in places like Afghanistan, Iraq, etc. Okay, and it's basically a way for the U.S. to apply soft power around the world and sort of get what it wants and impose its ideology, our ideology, onto the rest of the world. And it's a way to preserve the supremacy of the United States in opposition to our geopolitical adversaries like China, like Russia, or the former Soviet Union. In theory, that's fine. Okay, actually, and this is like my controversial take. I think that's fine. Like, exercising soft power around the world is fine. The problem is that the way we are, the question is, who is exercising soft power? Is it us? Is it the United States people and the interests of the United States people, or is the people, the entity running USAID, this kind of globalist, sort of post-national network of NGOs and organizations who don't want to support the interests of the United States people, but instead want to impose, what you might call international wokeism on the rest of the world.
Yes.
And what it turns out, when you look at the programs being funded by USAID, it is in fact a soft power tool for the global American empire to impose international wokeism on the rest of the world. So we end up spending billions and billions and billions of dollars to do things like promote transgender operas in Colombia. That's just one example. And so this has really, I think, made people rethink not just how the federal budget's being spent, but also what is our foreign policy agenda? Who is this serving? Do we need to do this, et cetera? So that's the 500-foot view. I'm sure I'm missing something there.
Well, let's apply the Elon analysis to this. You talked about payments, these grants for gender stuff in Afghanistan. I know that through USAID and other agencies, they established a master's degree in gender studies at Kabul University. So it's like, yes, that's going to solve Afghanistan, which has a 70% illiteracy rate.
Real quick on Afghanistan, I mentioned Chemonics doing infrastructure there. They spent $90 million in order to promote the hiring of women in the government. 60-some women were hired over the course of the number of years that $90 million was spent. We spent $90 million to get 60-plus women hired in the Afghanistani government.
Well, they must have been top talent, $1.5 million each. They must have been VCs and computer engineers, the whole thing.
We spent $25 million to raise the literacy rate in Sindh province, Pakistan. It began in 2010. The literacy rate was 69%. The program ended in 2014. The literacy rate at the end of this program was 62%. So there was a 7% drop in the literacy rate. And so this is the other thing. It's not, this money is not even fulfilling its ostensible obligation. So regardless of what you think, for example, of spending billions of dollars in HIV medicine in Africa, in an audit from 2017, only 7% of the contractual obligations of the company providing this PEPFAR were actually fulfilled in the African continent. So it's just a naked looting of the treasury.
And the second element, so that's the payments, and then we also have personnel. And I have a story that I think illustrates the kind of general culture at USAID. Supatra and I went years ago now to a wedding down in Monterey. Beautiful place, nice canyon. Go out to this wedding, and the couple had both worked for USAID. They both had PhDs. They were both USAID alums. They had this wedding, and of course, what did we do at the beginning of the wedding? They come and they're doing like an Indian dance, and they come to this beautiful field, and then the bride gets up and says, "Before we start, we want to recognize that this is the ancient tribal land of the Wampanoag Indians. And if you listen closely, you can hear the trees crying for the injustices that were done." Everyone bowed their heads. A moment of silence. It's like, I had been teleported into an episode of Portlandia and just trying not to laugh through this. Yeah. But what this is the multi-billion-dollar subsidy for that culture, those overeducated and undercapable people that just live off this massive grift. And what happens is that they have USAID, which routes money to NGOs, which pay hefty annual salaries to the employees and executives, and then whether or not they actually send the money overseas, and then after that, whether or not the money actually achieves their intended purpose or any other purpose, is almost irrelevant, because this is welfare for PhD, left-wing PhDs. And I don't think it is too much more. Okay, bracket, malaria, bracket maybe some of the other public health programs, rudimentary stuff. But that's really a small fraction. And certainly the left would try to hide behind, malaria nets or whatever, but that's not really the story.
Yeah, I mean, so there's this problem of graft and waste. I think also, like, from a foreign policy perspective, it would be fine. I mean, I don't want to say it would be fine, but you can make an argument that this waste is sort of justified if it was achieving certain kinds of foreign policy goals. And for example, like, if we were using this money as a carrot to get these countries to kind of do our bidding or to preserve, trade agreements that were favorable to us, fine. But when you actually talk to or read about people who are involved at this at the high level, they say that the exact opposite is happening. So Larry Summers, who of course was the president of Harvard and was on some committee with Obama. I think he was a high-level official at one point. I don't remember.
He was Council of Economic Advisors for Obama, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So, he had this quote from, I think it was 2023, and he said, I was talking to this high-level official at some foreign country, I think in Kenya or something, and the high-level official said, when we do a deal with China, they come in and they build an airport. When we do a deal with the U.S., they come in and give us a lecture. And what the upshot of this is this kind of passive-aggressive, soft power imposition of this, frankly, very unpopular ideology. And it's very unpopular across the world. Nobody thinks this is a good idea to infect their countries with this ideology that really is only meaningful for, a small percentage of people in the Beltway. It's driving our potential allies away from us and towards China and towards BRICS and other nations that want to see us fail. And so it really makes you stop and ask, what is the objective of this? Is it like your friends in Monterey who are just delusional true believers? Maybe some of that. I also worry that there is some kind of adversarial element involved here, or if it's not explicitly adversarial, the outcomes from continuing with this kind of foreign policy program certainly work against our interests, and we need to radically rearrange how we do things around the world. This just is not sustainable.
I think it is that. I think it's a form of ideological imperialism. A lot of these people genuinely believe that international wokeism is the right ideology. It's a synonym to progress, and that the problem in Afghanistan is Afghanistan's lack of critical race theory, gender ideology, in addition to the obvious economic problems. But look, economic problems are actually hard to solve. It's hard to make Afghanistan it's hard to get Afghanistan's GDP from whatever it is now to $25,000 a year. It's a lot easier to establish a master's degree program at Kabul University for gender studies. That's something that these people are capable of doing. And what we really need, if we want to have a USAID program, my proposal would be to gut the funding through zero-based budgeting. Everything is cut, and it can only come back if it's affirmatively approved. And then appoint Eric Prince as the head of USAID and tell him, use this $40 billion a year or whatever it is to advance the national interest. Use it as a bribe. Use it as a negotiating tool. Use it as a cudgel. Use it as a point of entry. But figure out how you can secure energy resources, how you can secure military partnerships, and use this largesse in the same way that we would have done in the past. That seems to be much more feasible, but people don't want to do that. It is considered too hard, too aggressive, too mercenary, too economical, and they'd prefer just to live in fantasy land.
Right? They would accuse, if you were just sort of transparent about these objectives, which I think we should be. I mean, we should just say what we want to do and then go do
Yes.
it. They would accuse you of being sort of colonialist, neo-colonialist, or imperialist, or whatever. But the truth is, we still are that. Okay.
Yes.
What USAID is doing right now is exactly as sort of colonialist or imperialist as what you're proposing. It's just we're being honest about what we want and trying to negotiate with a potential trade partner, a potential ally, some mutually beneficial arrangement, rather than this kind of coy, like hide the ball, sort of passive aggressive sort of foreign policy. You know, I would describe this as like longhouse foreign policy. What we want instead is, if we are going to be an empire, let's act like one. I mean, and okay, you know, Trump early on, maybe in 2016, I remember one thing he used to say about the Iraq war, and this used to get him in trouble, was we
Yes.
should have taken the oil.
Yes.
He's right. He's right. Okay, if we are going to act as the constabulary of the world, that we're going to be in charge of creating peace around the world, and we're going to do it at the point of a gun, and make massive expenditures and send troops over and put them in harm's way, we better get something really good out of it. This kind of moralistic human rights approach, which again is just very thinly cloaked imperialism of another kind, is driving these people away. It's not working, and we need to reassert a more sort of masculine, frankly, approach to this.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, look, USAID should parachute into let's say the oil-rich provinces of Nigeria, provide goods, services, medical treatment to the villagers, while the Nigerian military gets a subsidy to secure the area, and then ExxonMobil negotiates a favorable contract with the Nigerian government. And guess what happens? Everyone is happy because everyone is winning. The country is growing, and then we have another gas station around the world where we can fill up our tankers and warships. Like, that is the actual reality, the underlying reality of how the world works. We do that while we don't benefit from it or even acknowledge that that's what we're doing. I think that Trump is exactly right. You know, hey, we should have said we shouldn't have gone into Iraq, but after you do so, you should say, hey, we're going to pay for this through oil revenues. Here's how we're going to split them. Here's how we're going to support the government with them. And so, to me, this is an interesting international and domestic comparison where USAID is to the globe as the Department of Education, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Justice, et cetera, are to America. Like, we can laugh at the gender studies master's degree at one university in Afghanistan, and we should. But it stops being funny when you realize that actually they're doing the same thing at a massively larger scale domestically. And I think that it's not overstated to say that the permanent bureaucracy, which is monolithically left-wing, is waging an imperialist war on heartland America and trying to install enemy institutions with public funds, and then wage war on the common culture.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. I think that the analogy does apply. And, you know, the way I kind of, even if I'm being like maximally charitable, USAID is, you know, at the point of a bayonet, threatening these countries. You either do our bidding or we're going to run a color revolution on your country. Okay, we're going to activate. You know, I was reading one program in Burkina Faso, and it's like, you know, spending millions of dollars teaching Burkina Faso women how to like stitch local clothing. Okay, but actually, if you read into their description of what they're doing, it's community organizing, and it's taking people who are upset about the current government response to their needs, organizing them in unions, and then teaching them how to take power over their local officials. They are basically creating these small little armies that, if they want to activate to take over those countries, they can. They are doing, I think, the same thing to the heartland. They do it through a kind of indoctrination of kids in local schools and in universities, and they more so expanded out after that in like corporate boardrooms where the kinds of behaviors and the kinds of things you can say and the kinds of things you can believe are tightly constrained so that at a moment's notice, this mass of people can be activated in order to do things like riot in Kenosha, Wisconsin, okay, when the time is right to do so. So yeah, I think this is exactly right. And so the question then is, what do we do about this? I think broadly speaking, there's this recognition that this massive force of money and resource are working against the interests of our people, but we haven't yet settled on a solution. I mean, this gets us back to what we were speaking about previously. Like, do we just destroy these things or take them over? I don't know. I don't know how you do this either way. What's great about the last week, though, and it's kind of crazy how fast this is all happening. It really is like an awakening. Like suddenly everybody's aware of this in a way they weren't. The scales were over their eyes even 2 weeks ago. And so just that awareness, I think, is a massive first step to then figuring out the right strategy to do something about it.
That's right. And look, my theory of the case, at least right now, is that eliminating this as much as possible is the wisest course of action. I think for two reasons. One is the simple principled reason. I actually like our common culture. I like the organic culture of the people of the United States. Yeah. And I think that the less we tamper with it, the better. I actually trust like my neighbors, my local churches, our local schools, the actual community that I live in. If you reduce the influence of the federal government and these other institutions we're talking about, I think it would be naturally and effortlessly a healthier culture because we have roots and fundamentals that are strong. But even if you were to say, well, there's something we have to do, we have to, let's say, use these tools, my concern is that we just don't have the talent on the right. And the USAID question illustrates this. The discourse online this week has been people discovering these databases, but not really knowing how to use them. And so I've been accused of getting USAID funding routed through financial complexities. Apparently, I've gone totally woke. I'm controlled opposition. This is the thing. I'm sure you at Passage Press in due time will be accused of USAID.
At some point, okay? At some point, I'm sure. But, we've never taken a penny, a red cent, from the public coffers, okay?
That's exactly what someone who has taken money would say.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, I was texting with Anania, and we were lamenting like the stupidity of many people. But look, like we have to get smart, and I am genuinely. What I think the DOGE thing reveals, to bring it all together to one point, is we finally have a small cadre of very intelligent, very competent people. We can't take over universities and staff them in toto, but we can use high leverage tactics to reduce their power and then consequently to increase our power in a relative sense. And so that's like my guiding star. And I think we're still just entering the destructive phase. We actually have to go in there and turn things over and break things. And until we've really cleared the decks, I don't think we should build, which brings us to the last story. Trump has suggested clearing the decks of Gaza and building the Trump Hotel. Many people were kind of horrified and surprised and critical of this. I recognized it very clearly as bait that I did not take, but you had, let's say, a spiritual and metaphysical interpretation of this Trump-Netanyahu press conference. What was it?
Okay, this is something I'm going to repeat on this podcast over and over and over again. And people are going to be tired of hearing this, but they're going to eventually come around to this position, which is Trump is like a supernatural figure, and he is channeling the world spirit. And if you don't trust Trump, you are denying the prevalence of the world spirit being channeled through the vessel of Donald Trump, okay? This is like slight hyperbole, but like not really, okay? I sort of honestly mean this. And Trump is, I really do think, in the fullness of time, we will come to see that Trump is a unique figure in history, at least unique in the terms of, every once a century or so, someone comes along, this is great man of history theory, someone comes along who can actually manipulate history itself. He's not just kind of riding the wave of whatever's going on in the world. It's like he stepped outside of the rules that bind the rest of us to certain ways of doing things and thinking about things, and can actually just, if the analogy is like a chessboard, he can just tip it over, and then he can, set the pieces back up and start the game all over again under new circumstances and a new set of rules. And it's really unlike anything I've ever seen. And I'm aware of my bias here, but when I see Trump say this thing in this press conference, we are going to take Gaza and turn it into the Riviera of the Middle East, and mean it, okay? With Bibi Netanyahu standing there aghast. You realize anything is on the table. All of a sudden, when you're thinking about the Gaza-Israeli conflict, and you hear no sides, okay? And I listen all the time, on NPR all the time. You hear both sides, and there's zero overlap. There's no path towards reconciliation. And you sit there and go, how is this ever going to resolve itself outside of catastrophic death and destruction for one side or the other? How does this ever resolve itself? And we're bound inside this narrow history that eliminates options that might be available in some other conflict around the world to be able to compromise on this or that thing, because people's passions are just too inflamed to ever come to the table. And a guy like Trump comes along and he just he throws all of that out. And suddenly now, I don't think, for example, that turning Gaza into the Riviera of the Middle East is the thing that's going to solve the problem. But what he's introduced is a dozen other possibilities that might actually be viable, that the moment before he said it, literally the second before he said it, were historical impossibilities. So how does this all resolve? I have no idea. I'm not going to pretend I have a guess. But yeah, Trump has somehow figured out a way. It's like a magic trick to sort of bend the rules of geopolitics.
Yeah, it is incredible, and he really is suspending the status quo of reality and suggesting to you that there are other dimensions of reality that are available to you. And because he has the authority of being the president of the United States and the full force and might of the United States government underneath him, it's not just bluster or showmanship or a P.T. Barnum pitch. It's well, if he wanted to, he could send an aircraft carrier to Gaza and commandeer, $10 billion of USAID budget, and then assign, Eric Prince a construction contract to build Las Vegas. And I think it's also why it works and why I'm willing to always entertain it, to say, well, let's see, I don't know, let's see what happens, is because it's actually a very American thing. What is Las Vegas? Las Vegas is a city in the most inhospitable stretch of desert in the United States that was built by Trump-like figures who had a much poorer America at that time, who had much fewer resources, who didn't have any computers, and they had this dream that they would build this glittering casino city in the desert, and people would drive hours and hours and hours to spend all of their disposable income here. And look, was it also a little bit well, the mob was there too, and so they made a deal, they had some corruption. Yes, that's how construction and development worked at that time. It's probably how a lot of it still works today, with a kind of changing complexion. And so why not? I mean, we've done incredible things in our country. Why can't we seize Greenland? Why can't we retake the Panama Canal? Why can't we build a casino in Gaza? I mean, we have such a, and I actually find myself guilty of this too. And Elon and Trump have taught me this. why are my ambitions so small relative to what they might have been? In theory, we actually have more possibility, more opportunity. We should be taking more responsibility at a younger age. But we have this gerontocratic government, we have this maze of regulations, and we have this culture of demoralization where people, even like us in our 40s, who should be at the height of organizations, leading great campaigns, conducting diplomatic coups. Like, do we have a Lawrence of Arabia? No, we have Pete Buttigieg.
Yeah.
This is a tragedy for our country. And what I love about Trump, and I've grown to love it because I wasn't like a natural Trump guy in 2015, is, my God, he actually channels the American spirit.
Yeah.
And so I'm willing to give in to your Hegelian world spirit interpretation that could come crashing down horrifically in the next 4 years. But you know what?
Plan.
Like, trust the plan.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, from my time in D.C., it is absolutely true that patriots are in control.
Yeah.
I mean, the people in the administration, I mean, we were laughing. I was sitting in the White House with a close friend of mine and a couple other people, and we were talking about this. The last time we all met together in the White House was in, I believe, it was October 2020. It was the pandemic. It was critical race theory. It was the reelection campaign. It was, the Zuckerberg election, influence operation. It was a very dark time in the first Trump presidency, and we were all discussing these ideas. I remember in the OMB office with Russ Vought and his team, we were discussing defunding the left-wing NGOs. We were discussing getting rid of critical race theory in the government, which we did. And we were also discussing rescinding Lyndon Johnson's Executive Order 11246, establishing affirmative action, in the White House in 2020. But then the general mood was, these are kind of like pipe dreams. Yeah, they could happen. Yeah, if the president wins re-election, but we were in a totally different place in the country. Now, fast forward January 2025, sitting in this, essentially like the same chairs, and all of that stuff is getting done.
Yeah.
And so it's like, this is happening. The actual dreams that we laid out in theory are happening in practice. And there is a spiritual component to this. The country has changed. The culture has changed. President Trump has changed. And then the people around him, the same people that I met with in 2020, they've grown up over the last 4 years. And now they are competent, capable, fierce, focused, disciplined. And they're working hard, but they're calm, they're collected, and they are more right-wing than they were in 2020 and more right-wing than when they were in 2016. And we're talking about stuff that is happening in the forward-looking that is going to go even harder. And so to me, this is like such a fulfilling moment because as you and I have talked our way through this whole crisis and culture, and it seems like we're finally willing to not only address it, to raise it to the surface, but to do something about it. And for me, that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I mean, it goes like deeper than just like Trump himself because, he's this vessel, but there was a timeline shift, there was a break in the trajectory we were on into something else. And, I've identified the assassination attempt and others too, but as this kind of split in the timeline where we went to some new place. But then you also go back and you think like, if Trump would have won in 2020, would any of this be happening? The answer is absolutely not. No way. We would have just been stuck in that same old kind of stalemate where nothing can get done. Mitch McConnell and sort of the Republican adversaries are just, playing out the clock, and there's enough continued momentum from the resistance to keep Trump from doing anything. And there were all these problems in the inner circle with who was in charge of what and who was making decisions. Okay, none of this happened. So Trump, it turns out, actually has to lose.
Yes.
And you start to look back, and I understand, okay, rationalists, like the biases and logical fallacies that I'm committing here. But it does seem to be the case that all of these things that previously were seen as roadblocks and problems actually turned out to be necessary ingredients to produce the circumstances that we're in now, and we actually had to go through all that stuff. Those things were actually kind of good. They had to happen. I mean, and so, yeah, like real plan truster hours here, okay? Like, we're now on the good timeline. And what we've learned too, you know, you were talking about this thing with Russ Vought, and like, maybe we can do this, maybe we can't. We have just, and maybe this comes from Elon Musk or what, but you can just do things.
Yeah.
You can just, and like you said, this like applies to your life. Listener, you can just do things. There's like this thing you want. You can just like jump off the ledge, okay? Take the leap of faith and just go do it. And like things can and do work out all the time for people who just go and do things. And, you know, I think a lot of us, we live inside of a script and we're all like NPCs to some degree. We kind of just do as we're expected to do. And slowly over time, if you can start to become aware of that, you realize, no, there's no script. Like you're a player character. You can just make decisions. And so, yeah, that's kind of happened at scale. And it's an incredible thing to witness. It's just an incredible thing.
And it's the prison of rationality that prevents us from doing so, because a lot of the best decisions that I've made, that you've made, that everyone makes are irrational decisions.
Yeah.
You know, I talk to guys that are in the kind of rationalist side. I say, oh, you know, you married? Oh, yeah, I'm married. Would you say that you married your wife for rational reasons or irrational reasons? And would you say that she married you for rational or irrational reasons? And then people start to laugh. Well, you know, it makes sense. It's like, no, you followed something, and maybe even the odds were stacked against it. Maybe your friends didn't want you to succeed. Maybe your education suggested that you were taking an unnecessary risk or exposing yourself to embarrassment. But you have to go through all of those things. And then when you succeed, you realize in retrospect that you had to enter the gauntlet in order to get on the other side. And all of these things are mythological in nature. And America is mythological in nature. I mean, we are a mythological country. And what's great about America is that Americans were fully conscious as a civilization before they had a civilization, meaning we had Anglo pioneers, explorers, Puritans, dissidents that came to this virgin territory, but they already had the knowledge and consciousness of civilization. But then they just carved out a completely new civilization and discarded the rules, in whatever combination that they wished. Trump is that. Trump is that. He just chooses whatever rules he wants to follow because he thinks they're good, and then he just completely violates the other ones. And I love that. That to me is what life is about and why we've been successful. And even in my own life, like taking the mythology and then using it to look at my own life, it's like those are all of my favorite moments in my life. When you say, I'm not going to follow any of these rules, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to fight for it. And I look at other people like guys that I actually ran into a guy from college, actually a really nice guy, and I wouldn't count him in it, but it got me thinking, like, man, like some of these guys, it's like you get a job at JP Morgan, you go to McKinsey, you go to whatever, you're living in Falls Church. It's like, man, you had such talent and potential, and then your life is what? You're a fucking resume. That's all you are. Like you're a LinkedIn, That's the totality of your life, and I think it's a damn shame.
Yeah, I mean, it's fear, right? It's doing what's expected, because at least if you do what's expected, people aren't going to like make fun of you. You're not going to be embarrassed by that. There's like this agreement, so long as you do what's expected, you'll at least be treated with some amount of decency. And like there's this creeping fear that if you step outside that script, there's going to be the naysayers and you'll feel embarrassed and you might fail. And then what? Okay, this is like a major...
Did you have that when you started your publishing house? Did you go through this?
No, because I was self-possessed enough by that time in my life and with my wife and kids and family that, I felt like I could withstand that, and I felt like I needed to do it. I got to, we're you getting into therapy hours here. Okay,
Let's do it. At the end of the podcast is exclusively reserved for personal confessions. This is the premium content. Hours. This is the premium content.
Okay. So also, my father died. Okay, when right when my third son was born, my academic career was done because I didn't want to go back to campus. It was during 2021, and I was like, all right, what happens now? And there are like a bunch of paths in front of me, and it's like, okay, I could go be LinkedIn. I could go be Mr. LinkedIn. I could just do that. But is that what I want to do? Is that a fulfilling life? And, I don't remember the exact, motivation or what like catalyzed my decision to do something else. But it was maybe partly Trump or partly just this moment we were in, broadly speaking, where I thought, no, I am going to do something more potentially rewarding than that and at least give it a try. And if I fail, I can go back and do like a medical device sales or something. Okay, no offense to any medical device salesman out there, but I could fall back into a familiar script, or I could go back to law school or something. And I'm of course so glad I didn't. Even though it's been incredibly trying and like trying to make this work is not easy, but it's been incredibly rewarding too. And of course, the thing that I think about all the time is, if my book were like a novel, what is like the interesting next chapter? What happens to this person in the next chapter that makes it like an interesting, worthwhile story for like my kids to think about? And it's a very boring chapter for, me to go back and work in medical device sales. No, you should do something more meaningful than that. Like take a chance on something. And that's the story.
That's good, man. Yeah, I love that. And I agree. And I think a lot of especially younger men are going through this with an additional complication than the one that you and I faced. And I have this whole theory about the progression of culture between Gen X, Millennial, and Gen Z. Gen X was defined by the end of the Cold War, mass affluence, and boredom, like the Ferris Bueller character, right? The slacker character.
Slackers, yeah.
Millennials, we were defined by the Great Recession. We got out of college in kind of an economic downturn. And who is the archetypal millennial? The hipster. There's cheap rents in cities. There's cheap beer in like craft brew bars. And then you could put together a cool band or a cool film or a cool writing career and go forth from there. And then Gen Z gets the worst possible deal. It's like race, gender theory, anti-white shaming, and extremely high cost of living. And so...
and the death of the monoculture.
And the death of the monoculture.
Completely unmoored from a shared narrative with one another.
There's no Ferris Bueller.
Yeah, it's so alienating. I mean, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but the other millennial character is Mark Zuckerberg. Okay, the vacuous... Okay, sorry, Mark, you're doing better, okay? But it's like you kind of stand for nothing, and you've been raised during this period of unprecedented American triumph over the world, and like you can do anything. The world is just like your sort of sandbox to do anything you want. But there are no like real genuine beliefs. It's all these platitudes, and which ultimately that becomes that emptiness, that sort of vacuous ideology that consumes so many millennials. I'm sure you know these people too.
Oh yeah.
It's the erasure of religion from public life too. So what fills that vacuum is wokeness. Okay, this is what happens. This is the story of how wokeness takes over. Is millennial and Gen Xers who have deleted from their sort of spiritual software like God and religion. There's still some need to fill that up with something, and it becomes this other thing.
So
Okay,
I guess
sorry.
then, no, I guess that's right. And what you're identifying is the shadow side of these archetypes.
Yeah.
The Ferris Bueller character, in my mind, is the hero, anti-hero kind of character, the Big Lebowski style archetype.
Yeah.
The hipster, to me, is an admirable, noble creature who wants aesthetic experiences.
Good
He wants
coffee.
beauty. He wants incredible coffee. He's willing to have a certain ascetic sense, giving up material comforts to pursue higher culture. Love that. Maybe was that for a short period. But you're identifying the shadow side, the dark side, the empty side, the nihilistic side. And so here's how I'll end it. The green-haired USAID Gen Z, goblin is the shadow side. And maybe what we're seeing with these DOGE kids is the emergence of a new Gen Z hero.
Nice.
And so we'll see that. And maybe that's how this is all going to play out. Because like you said, we're on the good timeline. You're in the right place. Your life is your life. And Lomas, I'll give you the last thought.
No, that's great. I think we should end it there. I just heard my kids come in the door, so I got to go play dad now. No, this was good. This was good. I think we hit what we needed to hit here. We're ending it on that high note, the good timeline, our young heroes. They're not going to be working at Panda Express. This is the last time on the podcast I'll mention Panda Express. They are going to be running the federal government, and they are precisely the people we need, Roman Empire respecters, highly competent tech people, and who are willing to endure these kind of the slings and arrows of, there are our kind of cultural adversaries who, and all, the Mystery Grove quote, it's all just petty resentment for the well turned out. And the rest is just window dressing, okay? And we can ignore them now. We actually don't really need to be concerned with them at all.
Great.